All right, let's see here. I was working on the life coaches video. Yeah, see, I remember entire sections of this script were pointless, and singling out life coaches was a bit unfair. Yeah, let's make this about self-help in general. On this channel, I've made videos about religions, political philosophies, multi-level marketing schemes, and sex cults. Today, I'd like to talk about something that combines all of those things. Wait, have I made the sex cults video yet? Oh God, I haven't even made... Oh no, I went back way too far. If it was gonna be after the Mormon video, it might as well have been after... Oh, now I have to remake all of my best videos. Fine, I guess this is also the sex cults video. Self-help and sex cults. I'm sure I can connect those topics. This video is brought to you by CuriosityStream and Nebula. Life coaching as a concept has always existed in some form. Whether you're talking about a mentoring relationship like Plato and Aristotle, or just your cousin giving you dating advice, people have been coaching each other on how to live since basically the beginning. But paying someone to do it professionally is a relatively recent phenomenon. Life coaching is the most recent addition to the wider self-help industry, which got its start in literature. There are hundreds of thousands of self-improvement books on the market today, but the genre didn't really exist until 1859, when Samuel Smiles published the first self-help book. Rather conveniently, it was literally titled Self-Help. Though the book is rather light on providing any practical advice, it seems much more interested in identifying the cause of your trouble. Which, hey, that's the first step, right? According to Smiles, most of society's problems stem from poverty, and poverty is the result of irresponsible decisions, both economic and moral. Because of that, his book is sometimes referred to as the Bible of Victorian liberalism. This individualistic narrative was somewhat new at the time and became quite popular. If you live in poverty, it must be because you made bad decisions. All of society would be improved if everyone just helped themselves and made good decisions. This emphasis on taking personal responsibility for one's own economic situation will become a running theme in the self-help industry. It's empowering to think that as long as you are in control of your life, you can improve it. Before we move on, I think it's important to note that before writing his book, Samuel Smiles was a failed doctor and journalist who lost all of his money on bad investments. Then he published Self-Help, which quickly became a bestseller. Within a few years, he was basically the first celebrity consultant. People wrote to him asking for his advice on everything from business to politics. Just keep in mind, this is how the industry started. Almost a century later, people began to realize that just improving your economic situation didn't necessarily lead to a happier life. It helps, but you also have to work on your spiritual and psychological situation. So in 1952, Norman Vincent Peale published his book, The Power of Positive Thinking. You see, people are just as happy as they make up their minds to be. According to Peale, many of us manufacture our own unhappiness by thinking unhappy thoughts. So we just have to change our inner monologue. He suggests that a lack of self-confidence is the greatest problem facing individuals, which can be treated by repeating a number of affirmations to oneself every day. And now it's time for Better Affirmations. I can do all things through Christ, who strengthens me. This is the day which the Lord hath made. I will rejoice and be glad in it. God is with me, God is helping me, God is guiding me. Because I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me. Okay, I'm not sure where that last one came from, but the rest of it, as you probably guessed, is derived from the Bible. The main takeaway from the power of positive thinking is to put yourself in God's hands. The first step to living a happy life is to pray. But when you're praying, don't ask for anything. Just assume it will be answered and think. Those who assume success often already have it. Step 2 is to always picture success in your mind. Never mention the worst. In fact, don't even think about it. Never take counsel of your fears. Minimize obstacles in your mind. The rough patches ahead are only a problem if you decide they are. Step 3 is to profit, or as Peale put it, actualize. Heaven helps those who help themselves, so as long as you repeat your affirmations and think positively, things will happen for you. During the Fourth Great Awakening, a lot of Americans took to that message. This book spawned an entire subgenre of Christian self-help which continues to give that same advice. meditate on the scriptures, and pray. And if that works for you, great. But some people were hoping for a more secular approach to self-improvement, which led to the human potential movement, when people were trying just about anything to expand their minds. Along with drugs, new religious movements, and various New Age pseudosciences, people were trying all sorts of new methods to lead a more fulfilling life. Do you remember Maslow's hierarchy of needs? He came up with it in the 1940s, and that top piece is called self-actualization, when one achieves their full potential. That's the goal. That's what everyone wants. How do I get that? By meeting all of the other higher order needs in this pyramid. The bottom ones are basic, food, water, and shelter, but the middle ones are a little trickier, like having friends, relationships, and self-esteem. You can't just go to the store and buy those. While there were plenty of books on self-confidence, none of them worked quite as well as face-to-face practice. So the Leadership Dynamics Institute began holding seminars in 1967. For $1,000, you could attend a 4-day personal development workshop where you'll be pushed out of your comfort zone, and possibly even tortured or sexually degraded. The methods they employed were not scientifically or ethically sound, and after multiple lawsuits, the seminars ended in 1973. They were just a front for an MLM known as Holiday Magic, which was shut down a year later. Borrowing that idea, in 1971, Werner Erhard began Erhard Seminars Training, or EST. They basically did the same thing, but over the course of 2 weekends. The program promised to free people from their past so they could live more fully in the present. Erhard stopped giving seminars in the 80s, but several of his students bought the rights to his program and founded Landmark Education in 1991. They continue to give seminars to this day, along with hundreds of other copycats. At this point, the books and even the tapes and CDs were just marketing materials to get people interested in the seminars, where the real money was made. Nobody exemplified that strategy better than Tony Robbins, who burst onto the scene in 1983 with the Firewalk experience. During this seminar, people would walk over 2,000-degree coals in order to show themselves that with the right mindset, they can accomplish anything. Several science programs, including the Mythbusters, have done experiments debunking the mind over matter aspect of this stunt. It's actually pretty safe as long as you keep moving. But here's the thing, if a simple party trick is all it takes to give you the self-confidence necessary to change your life by asking for a raise or filing for divorce, great! You're telling me I can get that without medication? More party tricks, please. Thankfully, in his 1986 book, Unlimited Power, Tony gives us a number of different methods we can use to break through our fears and limitations, changing what you believe you're capable of. The book focuses on a communication technique known as neuro-linguistic programming, or NLP, developed during the Human Potential movement. Tony was a student of one of NLP's founders, John Grinder. He describes neuro-linguistic programming as the science of how language, both verbal and nonverbal, affects the nervous system. It's a tool you can use to define human needs. NLP combines several communication techniques like body language reading, hypnosis, suggestion, and manipulation. Nowadays, it's viewed as a pseudoscience or just good old-fashioned gaslighting. But in the 80s, this was all the rage. Everyone from business executives to pickup artists wanted to learn how to manipulate people and get them to do what they want. I mean, they wanted to develop their communication skills so they could lead a happier life. According to Tony, if you want to duplicate any form of human excellence, you should model the behavior of successful people in 3 ways. You should start by adopting their belief systems. This doesn't necessarily mean religion, but if they believe that heaven helps those who help themselves, you should believe that heaven helps those who help themselves. If they believe that positive thinking has the power to alter reality, or that poverty is the result of irresponsible behavior, you get the idea. Find out what successful people believe and start believing it yourself. Beliefs are a filter. They're a range of possibilities. Whether you believe you can or you can't, you're right. And this will help you break out of your limiting beliefs. Second, you should duplicate their mental syntax, which is the order in which they communicate with themselves. How are you supposed to figure that out? By watching their eye movements. According to neuro-linguistic programming, when someone stops to think of an answer, the direction they look will tell you what they're thinking. Most importantly, whether they're retrieving information or simply making it up. NLP says that your eyes have to move to a specific spot in order to activate certain parts of the brain, like memory or creativity. Hopefully you understand why this is now considered pseudoscience. But Tony says you can use that information to figure out how successful people think, especially about themselves and others. And finally, you should model their physiology. I've talked about this before because there is some actual science behind this. Try your best to mimic their posture, their facial expressions, their breathing pattern, and even the tone of their voice. Every time they brush their hair out of their face, you should brush your hair out of your face. If you do this right, over the course of a conversation, the person you're talking to will subconsciously like you more. If they start mimicking your behavior back to you, you've got them. In the beginning, Tony described his seminars as communications workshops because the quality of your life is the quality of your personal communication. How you communicate with yourself will determine how you feel and behave. This is different from the power of positive thinking. Affirmations without discipline are the foundations of a delusion. Behind your faith, there must be works. So at the end of the seminar, you make a public commitment to do something beyond your present ability. And most importantly, you make that deal with someone who will hold you accountable. Over the years, Tony has refined and updated his seminars, including removing any reference to neurolinguistic programming. He still uses the techniques, he just doesn't call them NLP. In 2006, he began the Date with Destiny seminar, designed to give people the tools to empower themselves. For just $49.95, you can spend 6 days not only solving your problems, but dealing with the things that caused them in the first place. Here we can see old techniques like making personal deals with audience members.
So you and I are gonna make a deal.
The use of hand signs, chants, and audience repetition.
Who knows what I'm talking about here? Say I. Say I. Good. How many came? Because that's major outcome. Say I.
And a few new techniques to push people out of their comfort zone, like standing way too close to people and the use of taboo language. When you hear a fucking swear word, especially if it's unexpected, it breaks you out of your thought pattern. All of the background noise melts away and suddenly you are completely focused on the speaker. That was the first uncensored F-bomb on the channel. How'd you feel about that? I kind of admire his use of swearing because it's pointed and intentional. It isn't excessive, it's just rare enough to get your attention. He uses these techniques to perform live interventions with people in the audience. He seems to have the uncanny ability to figure out what someone's problem really is. They might raise their hand to complain about their diet, only to end up forgiving their father. While it's tempting to think that Tony is an amazing cold reader, the reality is that there is some production magic going on behind the scenes.
Sit down and write down. What has prevented you from crushing it? What has prevented you from living what you dream? What belief? What behavior, what emotional habits, what's prevented you?
So while it may seem like he's randomly picking someone out of the audience, that someone has already self-identified what they want to work on. He isn't pulling it out of thin air, at least not completely. And that's why I don't really have any issues with what Tony Robbins is doing. He's just using a bit of showmanship to help people solve the problems they've already identified. He isn't inventing new ones to keep people coming back for more. Due to the popularity of Tony Robbins' books and seminars, thousands of people decided to model and duplicate that success during the 80s and 90s. There was an explosion of self-empowerment and professional development seminars, motivational speakers, and life coaches. The International Coaching Federation was founded in 1995 and is currently the largest organization of life coaches, with over 40,000 members. All told, there are over 71,000 life coaches in the world. The industry is completely unregulated. Just about anybody can decide to become a life coach and start dispensing advice, without any credentials or even a certificate. Because of that, the ICF has taken it upon itself to establish their own certification standards. The lowest level they recognize is the Associate Certified Coach, where you need 60 hours of training and 100 hours of experience. 33,000 of their members hold one of these certifications. You could try to get these hours on your own, or you could take an ICF-approved course which will guarantee that you meet the requirements. Some programs take a year to complete and cost as much as $18,000. Many people see life coaching as a cheaper alternative to mental health treatment or traditional therapy, and it very much is not. Life coaches cannot prescribe medication, and they're not equipped to handle histories of abuse or treat actual disorders like depression or anxiety. They also cost an average of $244 an hour, so they aren't cheaper either. But not everybody needs to see a psychiatrist. If you want the confidence to ask that girl out, work on your career goals, or just tidy up around the house, maybe a life coach is for you. Just make sure you go into it having identified the fear or obstacle you want to overcome, And define what successfully reaching that goal physically looks like to you. Don't let them tell you what is wrong with you. When beginning with a life coach, make sure that you sign a contract for a predetermined amount of time, preferably a few months. You don't want an open-ended contract that could last forever. A common trap with life coaches and self-help more generally is that they keep inventing new problems for you to work on or provide vague goals that you can never really reach. More confidence isn't a goal. You want the confidence to ask for a promotion or change careers. Or perhaps you'll want to become a life coach yourself. It is extremely common for the clients of life coaches to become life coaches.
I started working with my coach in November of 2020. It's vital for coaches to have coaches. Because who's checking my thinking? Who's asking me incisive questions that are making me a little uncomfortable? And who's holding me accountable?
It's vital for coaches to have coaches? That almost makes it sound like a pyramid scheme. Here in my garage, haven't bought my Lamborghini yet, but you know what I like a lot more than materialistic things? Knowledge. In fact, I'm a lot more proud of these new notebooks I had to buy to fit all of the notes I'll be taking while watching documentaries on CuriosityStream. CuriosityStream is a subscription streaming service that offers thousands of documentaries and nonfiction titles, which you can access across multiple platforms. Want to see how the human potential movement is getting along in modern times? Check out The Human Limits, a documentary showcasing people with extraordinary abilities. A blind concert pianist, a human lie detector, and a math savant who is as accurate as a calculator. Break through your limiting beliefs by going to curiositystream.com/knowingbetter, where you can get an annual subscription for only $14.79, while also getting access to Nebula. Nebula is a streaming service built by fellow YouTubers to give us the confidence to overcome our fears of the algorithm. Along with seeing all of my content ad-free, you can also check out originals like Better Elevation, where different YouTubers talk about the tricks and techniques they use to make better videos. Guess I know what I'll be watching this weekend. As Warren Buffett says, the more you learn, the more you earn. So head on over to curiositystream.com/knowingbetter to get a 26% discount on both CuriosityStream and Nebula. You'll also be supporting the channel when you do. Alright, so this is the part you've all been waiting for. I'm going to talk about the sex trafficking network known as NXIVM, a self-help MLM which turned into a sex cult. They've been in the news a lot in recent years, with dozens of books and documentaries being made by the survivors, where they often say things like, anybody could fall for this.
Lived here for 12 years, was part of an organization that turned out to be a very dangerous cult. Blew the whistle on human trafficking and sex trafficking. Now there's a massive federal investigation underway. The umbrella company is NXIVM, NXIVM.
No way.
That's the one.
Oh my gosh, I had a meeting with it one time accidentally. But at that moment, I was like, I could have been in a cult, and that's how easy it could have been in. It's just like one split second of me being like, all right. I don't know.
It starts off, it feels like real answers. Like, I think the experience you had was weird. But there are different ways that, like, for us, we came in because we had real, legitimate, good experiences with people.
Anyone can make the decisions that I made. Anyone can be Jane.
I personally disagree with that sentiment, and to understand why, we have to understand the story of NXIVM's founder. Keith Raniere was born in 1960 and was raised in a suburb of Albany in upstate New York. But his story doesn't begin until 1988. That year, the Albany Times-Union printed a rather flattering profile of him, listing all of his achievements. He was fluent in 3 languages before he could read. He learned quantum physics by age 4 and was a judo champion by 11. He taught himself college math when he was 13. He finished high school when he was 16 and graduated from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute with 3 degrees in math, physics, and biology. He could unicycle, juggle, and was tied for the record in the 100-yard dash. He only requires 2 to 4 hours of sleep a night and has mastered 7 musical instruments. He's even a concert-level pianist. But most impressive of all, he has an IQ of 240. The standard IQ test only goes up to 200, but he took the Hufflin Mega Test, and that score got him into the 1989 Guinness Book of World Records for having the highest IQ. He was described as one of the top 3 problem solvers in the world. This is basically the foundational myth for all of his future businesses, so it would be really embarrassing if it ever came out that he cheated. or that he failed quantum physics and graduated with a 2.26 GPA. 1989 was the last year Guinness ever printed the highest IQ record, because the test he took was widely discredited, on top of the fact that IQ is a bullshit made-up concept. But back in the 80s and 90s, respectable people still believed in it, and this gave Keith Raniere a lot of credibility, especially among the wealthy business people who cared about that sort of thing. So when he founded Consumers Byline Inc., or CBI, in May of 1990, he had no trouble finding early investors. CBI was basically a carbon copy of Amway. Keith had worked for a number of MLMs during the 80s, selling prepaid legal services and health supplements, but he was particularly impressed by Amway's ability to turn customers into recruiters. So he decided to duplicate that model of success. It was essentially an at-home Costco. You would pay for a monthly membership and get a discount on household goods purchased through the company. You also got a share of the profits whenever someone you recruited bought anything. He developed a human motivation and behavior model to help bring in top sellers, and specifically targeted the wives of Southern ministers. Because if you can get her entire social network will follow. MLMs still do this, and it's very effective. Because of that, in 1993, the Attorney General of Arkansas opened an investigation into CBI as a pyramid scheme, though nothing would come of that for a few years. By that time, they had over 300,000 members nationwide. It's around this time that Toni Natali entered the picture, when she attended a CBI seminar and was immediately drawn to Keith. Which is understandable, he is the smartest man in the world after all. When they finally met one-on-one, he cured her of her cigarette habit by having her squeeze a pressure point on her hand whenever she got the urge to smoke. This is a bit of pop psychology known as anchoring. When she left the room, she realized that what she thought was just a few minutes was actually several hours. She now believes that he hypnotized her during that meeting. It didn't take long before Toni became Keith's girlfriend. The only problem was that she was at least his fourth concurrent girlfriend. Keith was not polyamorous, he was just a cheater. Each girlfriend thought they were the only girlfriend. He founded Consumers Byline with his college girlfriend, Karen Unterrainer, who was the corporate actuary. The primary financier was Pam Kafritz, another girlfriend from the 80s. But his longest running relationship was with a girl named Gina Hutchinson, who became sexually involved with Keith in 1984. When she was only 15. Keith was a 24-year-old college student at the time. Gina was interested in New Age concepts like shamanism, Eastern philosophy, energy healing, and martial arts. And wouldn't you know it, Keith was an expert in all of those things. Every one of those childhood accomplishments that were listed in the Albany Times-Union article was the result of a pickup artist strategy. He became a judo master specifically to get unsupervised contact with Gina. He also learned about energy healing because of her, which convinced him that he needed to frequently vent off his kundalini energy by having sex with multiple women. That seems to be a common trait among spiritual gurus for some reason. Over the years, his strategy for picking up women shifted from becoming an expert in their hobbies to finding their pain point and using it against them. Toni's was her lack of education. They had to keep their relationship a secret because what would people think if the smartest man in the world was dating a high school dropout? So they came up with a plan to get her some business experience. In 1994, Keith helped Toni found the National Health Network, an MLM which sold vitamins and supplements. She was also a top seller of skincare products at CBI. By 1996, at least 25 different states had opened investigations into CBI as a pyramid scheme. Consumers Byline was forced to shut down that same year. Keith didn't have to admit to any wrongdoing, but he signed an agreement banning him from ever promoting a chain distribution scheme again. Luckily, his girlfriend Toni was still the president of her very own MLM. While he wasn't the founder or even an employee, Keith was still heavily involved and frequently held sales seminars where he taught NLP techniques. This is when he began the shift towards developing a self-help program to change the world. By 1998, Toni was becoming disillusioned with her relationship to Keith and sought the advice of a therapist. But not just any therapist, a hypnotherapist. Nancy Saltzman was a registered nurse with her own therapy practice. She was also an expert in hypnosis and neurolinguistic programming. Like Tony Robbins, she was also a student of NLP's founders. After hearing about Keith's insane work schedule and grandiose claims, she decided that she had to meet him in person. I mean, he is the smartest guy in the world, and a fellow NLP practitioner. During that first meeting, she realized that he was much more of an expert on the topic than she was, and decided that she had to work with him. She signed a mentoring contract which included a lifetime non-compete clause. As a condition of this agreement, she could never take what she learned and work for anyone else, or open her own self-help or therapy practice. In July of 1998, the two of them founded Executive Success Programs, or ESP. Though, because of that CBI agreement, Keith was just the spiritual guide, while Nancy was the actual founder and president. And as it turns out, another one of Keith's girlfriends. Initially, the program was geared towards business executives, thus the name, but a quick glance at the news made any potential corporate client wary of anything having to do with Keith. So they changed it to focus on the average middle-class worker. The program blended elements of neuro-linguistic programming with philosophies like objectivism and Scientology. Keith read all of Ayn Rand and L. Ron Hubbard's work. We'll get to the actual content in the next module, but the similarities are so striking that it's best to think of this program as a direct sequel to Scientology, without the evil Lord Xenu and his alien spirits. To help get the company off the ground, Nancy shut down her hypnotherapy practice and pushed her clients into executive success programs. Not exactly the most ethical decision she could have made, but it pales in comparison to the fact that she also recruited her daughter Lauren, who then also became one of Keith's girlfriends. The most consequential former client to be brought in was Barbara Boucher. She was a financial planner and quickly distinguished herself as ESP's top recruiter and Keith's top girlfriend. That position came with a special nickname, Dagny. Former Dagnies included Tony Natali, who shut down the National Health Network and left in 1999, and Gina Hutchinson, who died by suicide in 2002, still completely devoted to Keith. At this point, Keith's NLP pickup artistry had advanced to a level where if he couldn't find a pain point to use against you, he would invent one and convince you that it's real. Barbara Boucher was told that she was a Nazi in a past life and needed to make up for it. Another ESP student named Kristen Snyder had become convinced that she was personally responsible for the Columbia Space Shuttle disaster and killed herself in 2003. Her suicide note specifically mentions executive success programs as the cause. In the year 2000, they patented the first 20 modules of ESP, which they referred to as tech. By 2003, they had hundreds more. By that time, just under 4,000 people had taken a course. Keith was determined to recruit celebrities and the people who ran the motor of the world, specifically targeting generational wealth. Because if you can't get the billionaires, you can at least get their children. Thanks to Barbara Boucher's marketing efforts, people like the former First Family of Mexico and the CEO of Seagram's, Edgar Bronfman, had taken courses, but didn't really join the program. You know who did though? Their kids. Emiliano Salinas would go on to found ESP Mexico, which won't become important to the story until way later. For now, let's focus on the Bronfman sisters, Sarah and Claire. Claire Bronfman was on her way to becoming an Olympic equestrian show jumper when Keith decided to insert himself into the situation as her coach, because having an Olympian in the program would be good marketing. Her father noticed what was happening and went to the press, resulting in this 2003 Forbes article where he accuses ESP of being a cult. Cult is a functionally meaningless word. It's more of a value judgment. In common usage, we just apply that label to any new religious movement we personally disagree with. I'm much more fond of the term high control group. Unfortunately, Claire didn't qualify for the Olympics and quit the sport to devote herself to executive success programs. She became the primary financier going forward. She also predictably became one of Keith's girlfriends, with the bad press from her father being the ethical breach she needs to make up for. At this point, Keith had at least a dozen girlfriends filling various roles in his company. In 2003, NXIVM was founded as an umbrella corporation for executive success programs. ESP was just one of hundreds of companies within NXIVM. There was XOSO for yoga and fitness, Ultima for performing arts, and Rainbow Cultural Garden, which was an immersive language program for children. Executive success programs was by far the largest and the most common entry point into NXIVM. ESP gave one-off courses in hotel conference rooms, promising to enhance human performance in order to recruit people module into the much more lucrative multi-day seminars. It cost $2,700 to attend a 5-day intensive. These intensives went from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. every day, and each module was built around watching a video presentation followed by a group discussion. As boring as that might sound, it was actually quite high energy. The first module on the first day is known as Rules and Rituals, which introduces you to the program, the terms you'll need to know, and your teachers. Keith Raniere was given the title of Vanguard. He claimed that the name meant he was the leader of a spiritual movement, but in truth, it was just the name of his favorite arcade game. Nancy Saltzman was known as Prefect, meaning the leader of a school. You had to refer to them by their titles, you had to take your shoes off at the door, and bow anytime you entered or exited the room. This should sound familiar to anyone who has taken any form of martial arts. You also had to wear one of these little sashes, which indicates your rank within NXIVM. White was a student. This is what everybody wore when they first started out. Next was yellow, known as a coach. At this rank, you were allowed to perform EMs, which we'll get to in a moment. Going from white to yellow was actually quite fast. Much like a mobile game, they wanted you to feel like you were making progress quickly. The transition to the next rank, known as Proctor, could take years since you had to earn 4 stripes before advancing. That's why this rank system is known as the Stripe Path. Proctors wore orange and were the first rank that could actually make any money within the program. Senior proctors wore green and could open their own centers, where intensives and other courses could be offered. Next up were blue and purple, known as counselor and senior counselor. The only people to ever achieve these ranks were Keith's girlfriends. Nancy Saltzman, or Prefect, was the only person allowed to wear a gold sash. Again, this should look extremely familiar to anyone who has taken martial arts. This has the same color order as karate belts. Vanguard wore a white sash because he considered himself to be a permanent student of life. But his wasn't short and awkward like this. If you think this is goofy, that's the entire point.
I'd say we have a higher percentage of independent thinkers that come here. That's what we want. We put rules and rituals up front to be the guardian of the gate. We want some people to say, I don't want anything to do with this, walk out the door. Great.
So let's circle back to my original question. Could anybody fall for this? Keith just told you that the answer is intentionally no. Anybody could wander into a conference room and listen to a lecture. Anybody could sign up for a 5-day self-help intensive. But not everybody is willing to call someone Vanguard and wear a dorky sash. And that is just the first filter. During abuse, rights, and injury, the teacher led a group discussion meant to define the word abuse. What does it mean to be abused? Keith was very fond of using the example of age of consent. I can't imagine why.
In some states, there are ages. There's the age of consent. Some states it's 17, some parts of the world it's 12, some parts of the world it's right. So what's abuse in one area is not abuse in another. But what is it really? Abuse is, is the person a child or is the person adult-like? Some little children are perfectly happy with it. So abuse is a made-up human construct. And a lot of times, the screaming of abuse is abuse in itself. Yeah. How we illustrate human nobility, how we are noble, is to get rid of the concept of victim like that. Right. There are things that are terribly wrongful, but the person receiving it only decides they're a victim if they accept that.
These discussions are designed to be divisive so that you begin to feel that you don't understand these concepts as well as you previously thought. Then the teacher can implant their own twisted definition of abuse. During the module on honesty and disclosure, students are directed to answer questions like, what is honesty? Can you ever be 100% honest? Are there any situations where being completely honest might actually be harmful? They're taught that having shared secrets with someone is a great way to build relationships, and they're encouraged to disclose their deepest secrets with people in the class. Some people apparently confess to murder during this exercise. In some of the level 2 modules, they're taught how to properly make a vow and back it up with collateral and penance. Your word is worth nothing to people you don't know. You have to back it up with something. So if you promise to go to the gym with somebody, you should put up collateral to prove that you mean it. Say $100. If you fail to do so, you lose the money and you owe penance. These are usually physical, like push-ups, wall sits, planks, cold showers, or even standing in the snow in the middle of the night. The whole idea is to motivate you not to have to do the punishment. If you are not uncomfortable, you are not working on anything. All of this is meant to test your boundaries. How can you overcome your limiting beliefs if you don't push yourself? Obstacles and fears are referred to as disintegrations, and they can be cured during a pseudo-therapy session known as an exploration of meaning, or an EM, where your coach would ask you a series of questions about a past trauma to decrease its effect on your present, like exposure therapy. If an EM is done well, you won't remember having the integration, and they can fix everything from fears to allergies to stuttering and even Tourette's. Does that sound familiar? It's basically auditing from Scientology without the E-meter. As I said before, this is basically a sequel to Scientology without the aliens. Disintegrations are just rebranded body thetans. The goal of the program is to become fully integrated, which is just clear. NXIVM was trying to create ethicists, which is funny because the doctrine and rules of both NXIVM and Scientology were referred to as ethics. Breaking the rules is known as an ethical breach. The charity front created by Claire Bronfman for NXIVM was called the World Ethical Foundations Consortium. Ethics is a NXIVM dog whistle. To them, it means something special. To you, it's just a charity with a normal sounding name. Continuing to borrow from Scientology, the people who leave are known as suppressives, and NXIVM was rather litigious towards former members. I'm kind of surprised that Scientology didn't sue them for copyright infringement. I've been dinged for way less. Even the strategy of going after the normal, well-functioning member of society was a stolen idea.
People keep trying to tell me it's because you're deficient and you're weird and you're damaged and you're vulnerable. No, they go for the people who are successful, easy people to get along with, capable of doing things. That's who they want to run their cult.
Scientology is for an able guy like you or like me, able to function in life, able to make his own way, does his work, and so forth. All right, that's the man that should be helped.
These intensives employ a lot of the same strategies as Werner Erhard, Tony Robbins, and even evangelical preachers from the post-World War II era. They're not presentations, they're high-energy events. You're pulling 14-hour days, so you're exhausted. You can barely think straight. Meanwhile, you're being asked to ponder deep questions about honesty and the nature of emotions, all the while being influenced by the group. They cheer for you every time you have an integration. You're learning secret handshakes, and your presenter is using repetition and having you participate in chants. And before you know it, this is all you want to do with your life. The people who really wanted to advance in NXIVM would often move to Albany, New York so they could be closer to Keith. They started buying up houses in Clifton Park and formed their own little neighborhood, though Keith himself never actually owned anything. His houses and businesses were all under his girlfriend's names, and he never even had a driver's license. He was basically a sovereign citizen living off the grid. The best time to talk to Keith was during midnight volleyball sessions or by going on a walk with him. Keith was a big fan of making business deals while walking. He called it building rapport, and if you remember Tony Robbins' advice on duplicating someone's physiology, this is a very easy way to make sure you're matching someone's breathing pattern and tone of voice. It also makes it feel like a shared journey. You're working towards something together. The big yearly event in NXIVM was called Vanguard Week, which began in 2003 as an annual celebration of Keith's birthday. Every August, they would spend a week at the Silver Bay YMCA. It was basically a summer camp for adults. They would attend discussions, play flag football, and of course, party. These are the true believers, so it's worth asking how many people attended this event. Over the entire history of NXIVM, around 17,000 people had taken an ESP course, and of that, at its peak, only 629 people went to Vanguard Week. Less than 5% of the people who took a course became permanent members. While you could describe neuro-linguistic programming as a form of hypnosis, it's much more of a selection and manipulation tool. And just like hypnosis, NLP doesn't work on everybody. It doesn't help you trick people into doing things. It helps you identify people who are already open to suggestion. If it helps, think of NXIVM as a suggestibility filtration system. Anybody could take a self-improvement course, but only some people would be willing to refer to a teacher as Vanguard, and even fewer people would be willing to move across the country to meet him. And those were the people who advanced in NXIVM. In 2004, Barbara Boucher was able to recruit Mark Vicente, a documentary filmmaker who had just released a movie called What the Bleep Do We Know?
All of this really is just a great illusion.
Are people affecting the world of reality that they see? You betcha they are.
What is reality? What is reality?
It's basically Ancient Aliens meets quantum physics. It's a bunch of nonsense. The point of showing you that was, he was primed to believe that our thoughts alter reality years before he ever took an ESP course. He became Keith's personal documentarian and filmed everything. Keith had a serious messiah complex. He thought all of these videos and recordings would be studied as devoutly as the Bible someday. But this wasn't a religious cult. It was a science-based self-help group.
We didn't join a cult. Nobody joins a cult. Nobody. They join a good thing, and then they realize they were fucked.
Would it surprise you to hear that this is actually Mark's second cult? What the bleep do we know was actually financed by Ramtha's School of Enlightenment, a New Age cult based out of Washington State. It's sadly common for cult or MLM victims to end up in another cult or MLM. Everyone involved here seems to have a history with pseudoscience, cults, or MLMs. This is Keith's fifth MLM that I can name. Both Tony Natali and Barbara Boucher regularly saw a hypnotherapist before meeting Keith. Nancy Saltzman was a hypnotherapist. But you know, when it starts off, it feels like real answers. How many of you are staring at this picture trying to figure out where you recognize her from? This is Mark's wife, Bonnie Peace, famous for her role as Beru in the Star Wars prequels. Through Mark, NXIVM gained access to the Vancouver acting community. He first recruited Sarah Edmondson, who would then go on to recruit Kristen Crook and Nikki Klein, who had roles on Smallville and Battlestar Galactica respectively. In 2006, Keith unveiled his latest tech, Jenness, the first women's movement to be founded by a man. That should set off some red flags for you right away. The course wasn't really about female empowerment. It just reinforced old gender stereotypes about Disney princesses.
The princesses look at the princes to go and slay the dragons, and the princes look at the princesses to be kept in a bubble and to look pretty, but never to really achieve anything much. That women aren't inherently reliable. Women aren't inherently loyal. Women aren't, they don't keep secrets, they talk amongst themselves or whatever. You women, you can't hold your emotions in check, can't keep your emotions out of your decision, do what you feel as opposed to do what is right from our perspective. You can't keep your feelings out of it.
And there's the person most of you were waiting for. Allison Mack was a Vancouver-based actress who played Chloe Sullivan on Smallville and attended a Jenness weekend retreat in 2006. And despite everything you just heard, she then took a 5-day intensive and was hooked.
When I went into the Jenness tracks, I carried with me years and years and years and years and years wrought with insecurity and confusion, covered up by a whole heck of a lot of ego and pride.
The sad part about hearing that is that we don't know if that was something she legitimately dealt with or if that was something Keith invented and convinced her of. Allison Mack broke up with her boyfriend and became the new Dagny in 2009. Around that same time, Barbara Boucher and 8 other women resigned in protest over how the business was being run. All of the top positions were filled by women Keith was sleeping with. Along with being unethical, this gave Keith an unusual amount of control and forgiveness, especially since they weren't considered equal partners. As with most high control groups, this mass exodus didn't really change that practice. It just allowed Keith to consolidate power. Anyone who didn't like the way he ran things was gone. Just a few weeks later, the Dalai Lama visited Albany to give a speech to NXIVM members and lend some credibility to Keith's teachings. He only did that after receiving a very large donation from Claire Bronfman's ethical charity. In 2011, they created the male counterpart to Jenness, known as the Society of Protectors, or SOP, which was arguably worse when it came to reinforcing gender stereotypes.
As men, we're the ones who hold the doors and who pick up the bags. And more seriously, we're the ones who go to war, and we're taught that we're to leave the ship last. We are the doers, the providers. We're the protectors. The primitive parts of us are hungry fucky beasties. I mean, that's what we want to do. I want to fuck it. Fuck it. So there's a very basic part of us that just wants to fuck something to get that release. For us, fucking, sex, has nothing to do with the other person per se. It's what's gonna feel good.
I'm gonna stop it there. I think you get the idea, but if you wanna see more, check out the documentaries in the description below. But just know that it gets way worse.
A baby, it's just something that feels good.
What if it was just a lump of flesh?
So while the women were over here being told that they're overprotected princesses, the men were being told that sexual aggression is just part of our nature. Both the men and the women were encouraged to get into peak physical condition. The women began restricting calories to an extreme degree, while the men had to practice readiness drills, where they might be called to go for a run at any moment.
Someday, that call's gonna come at 4 in the morning, and are you ready? Are you ready to push aside sleep, push aside all your other concerns, organize what needs to be done, and be there?
Members would get a text that they had to respond to in less than a minute. If they failed to do so, they owed penance, a concept most of them were familiar with from ESP. This wouldn't come out for years, but SOP was being groomed as Keith's personal army, with hundreds of men willing to come to his aid at any moment. Members of SOP and Jeunesse paid $50 a month to be a member of the program. It only costs like $2 to be a Knowing Better patron, and I won't restrict your calories or make you answer a text at 4 in the morning. I mean, you could pay $50 a month if you want. There is a tier for that. Just saying. In 2012, the restructured Jeunesse tracks were opened up to men. Now they could hear the Disney princess schlock, which most of them already believed anyway. But the next year, women were allowed into the new SOP Complete program. This was basically a recreation of the Stanford prison experiment, where the men played the role of guards and the women were subjected to days of abuse. This served as yet another boundary testing exercise. If a woman was asked to run face first into a tree or strip naked in front of everybody and she refused, you're so overprotective of your body. What are you so afraid of? You should probably get an EM for that. Meanwhile, the rest of the women who took the class were willing to wear tutus, lick puddles in the street, and be repeatedly humiliated in front of the group. They're probably willing to do just about anything.
Women, you have to learn to yield when you're a little boy. As a matter of fact, you yield all the time. You yield to adults, you yield to women, and you yield to all little girls.
In November of 2016, Keith's longtime girlfriend Pam Kafritz died of cancer. Along with being the financier of his first MLM in the 90s, she was also his procurer, a word which only has one meaning. She was basically his Ghislaine Maxwell. You have to understand, people in NXIVM thought Keith was a renunciate. He crafted an image of himself as a celibate spiritual guru, and with Pam gone, that image might become reality. To preemptively fill that void in his life, he and Allison Mack created a new group known as Dominus, Obsequious, Sororium, or just DOS. And they sold it as a women's empowerment group on steroids. There were 8 founding members, all of whom were Keith's girlfriends, including Allison Mack, Nikki Klein, and Lauren Saltzman, Nancy's daughter. They each took a lifetime vow of obedience to Keith. Then they all turned in collateral to back up that vow and began wearing neck or belly chains to symbolize that bond. But Keith didn't think that was profound enough. He had learned that severe initiation rituals resulted in a stronger commitment to the group. You feel like you've earned it. Think of fraternities, or to a lesser extent, the military. So he and the other founding members came up with a brand which they said symbolized the 4 elements: earth, wind, water, and fire. No heart, apparently. But recordings of Keith himself would determine that to be a lie.
So I was sort of thinking of it like this.
Yeah, with the triangle and like a graph, and like it's a cool kind of alien symbol. Yeah, like I mean, you can interpret it as a KR, but you can say like, no, it's not. You know,
or K, it's actually KAR.
All of the first line DOS members were given that brand by a professional. Everyone beneath them had to go through an extreme branding ceremony where they were held down and given the brand with a cauterizing pen and a stencil.
So, I think the person should ask to be branded. Okay. So that could be something that they say initially. Should say, please brand me, it would be an honor, or something like that. And they should probably say that before they're held down, so it doesn't seem like they're being coerced.
Dominus, Obsequious, Sororium doesn't actually mean anything, but you can sort of translate it as master over the slave women. DOS was a master-slave relationship. Keith was the master over Allison Mack and Nikki Klein. He could ask them to do anything he wanted, including the exact thing you're thinking of. Eventually, they had to start recruiting their own slaves. As is the case with many self-help programs, the initial victims of the scheme became victimizers as they became masters of their own pot of slave women. New recruits were required to turn over collateral every month. Nude photos weren't enough. They had to give over something much more valuable, like credit card numbers, the deeds to their house, or even family secrets. If they ran out of those things, they could just make stuff up. This is arguably worse than any actual secret, since slaves confessed to crimes they didn't commit or accused their parents of abuse that never happened. So not only was their reputation on the line, but their families. Masters regularly performed readiness drills with their slaves, and if anyone didn't respond in a minute, the entire group would be punished, often by a calorie restriction. Remember, most of these women were already familiar with collateral and penance. These weren't new concepts. Eventually, the second-line DOS slaves began getting assignments to seduce Keith, who they still thought was a celibate monk. He pretended to resist while having secretly ordered the assignment. At this point, you're definitely asking yourself how anybody could possibly join this, and I have to remind you that DOS was invite only. Keith handpicked the women that would be recruited. Of the 17,000 people who had ever taken a NXIVM course, only 700 or 800 were members of Jeunesse and SOP, and only 100 to 150 women joined DOS. He picked people he knew would follow orders. How could he possibly know that? Because he spent the last 2 decades developing a selection tool that would help him identify the people he could manipulate. So no, not anybody could fall for this. It was designed to be exclusive. A few weeks after the Harvey Weinstein story and the Me Too movement were in full swing, the New York Times broke the NXIVM DOS story with this article featuring Sarah Edmondson and her brand. Sarah was a second-line DOS slave under Lauren Saltzman. So here's a scary thought. If Keith Raniere had just been satisfied with the dozen or so actresses that had already made a lifetime vow of obedience to him, he probably would have gotten away with all of this. It was the second and third line DOS members that went to the press. The FBI opened up an investigation into Keith, and just a few weeks later, he fled to Mexico because he still had a lot of support there. ESP Mexico's founder also created a charity front known as In Lock Etch, which had thousands of members who all used the secret handshake. Maybe don't join anything that has a secret handshake. That seems to be a red flag. But if the US government wants to get you, they're gonna get you. And while hiding in Mexico, Nikki Klein posted a picture to Instagram featuring a well-known landmark, giving away their location. He was arrested by federales and extradited to New York in March of 2018. But here's the thing, almost none of the charges against him had anything to do with NXIVM, DOS, or branding, because none of that stuff is actually illegal. The United States is somewhat behind the times when it comes to laws regarding coercive consent. I personally disagree with this interpretation, but the fact that the women willingly handed over collateral and asked to be branded made it consensual in the eyes of the law. So what was he actually charged with? Racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking, attempted sex trafficking conspiracy, forced labor conspiracy, and wire fraud conspiracy. Note that he wasn't charged with 150 counts of sex trafficking, it was just 1. ESP Mexico was almost as large as its American counterpart. They had centers all over the country with hundreds of members. And a few Mexican families moved to Albany to be closer to Keith. One of those families had 3 daughters, whose names are protected by court order. Their pseudonyms are Daniela, Camilla, and Mariana. And most of the charges against Keith are related to what he did to them years before DOS. When the family moved to Albany, they were told that NXIVM would help them with their work visas and immigration papers. That never happened. They forged them, thus racketeering. He used the fact that they were undocumented immigrants and the threat of deportation to enter into a sexual relationship with each of the 3 daughters. They got pregnant multiple times and were pressured into having multiple abortions. In 2010, Daniela committed an ethical breach by falling in love with someone who wasn't Keith. As penance, he instructed her family to confine her to her room with no human contact. This unlawful detention lasted 23 months. When she finally left the room in 2012, she was dumped at the border without any identification or money, and she had to illegally cross into Mexico. She came back to testify at his trial 7 years later. Her sister Camilla was the first person to make a lifetime vow of obedience to Keith in 2014, and she became the first DOS slave when she was branded in 2015, which was well before Pam Kafritz died. He was planning this at least 2 years before that happened. The forced labor and wire fraud conspiracies were the only crimes related to Doss, and a jury found him guilty on all charges in June 2019. Despite the trial taking over a month, they deliberated for fewer than 5 hours. In October 2020, Keith Raniere was sentenced to 120 years in federal prison and a $1.75 million fine. He still has about a dozen supporters, including Nikki Klein. They formed a group called We Are As You and have been dancing under his prison window every week since he was arrested. Last I checked, they rebranded as the Forgotten Ones and are still active. Before Keith's trial even began, several of his co-conspirators pled guilty to their various charges, because despite being victims, they were also perpetrators. Claire Bronfman pled guilty to identity fraud and harboring an undocumented immigrant for financial gain, but not to the Mexican sisters. She did that to someone else entirely. She was sentenced to 6 years and 9 months in federal prison with a $500,000 fine. Allison Mack pled guilty to racketeering and racketeering conspiracy and received 3 years in federal prison with a $20,000 fine. She cooperated with prosecutors and received a reduced sentence. Lauren Saltzman also cooperated after pleading guilty. Her testimony and secret recordings of Keith are arguably the only reason he was convicted. She only received 5 years of probation and 300 hours of community service. Her mother, Nancy Saltzman, pled guilty to racketeering conspiracy and was just sentenced to 3 years in federal prison with a $150,000 fine. Wait, if they're all in prison, how could they possibly be a threat in the future? You better not have tricked me into doing this. Is this gonna be a regular thing now? Look, we have a major problem. When you assumed your past life in that last video, you split off all of the possible yous that could have been, and they exist now. There's a postal worker, a sheriff, a Mormon, and a motivational speaker. Yeah, how'd you know that? Bro, those are characters. From our videos? I've never done characters. We've literally always dressed like this. What? Are we even from the same future? I swear, if you tricked me into making this video, I'm gonna lose it. You mean like how you tricked that other guy into doing a video about Jehovah's Witnesses? I didn't tell you to do that. You came up with that one all on your own. Besides, I did you a favor. That original Life Coaches video was a disaster in literally every timeline. Wait a second. I recognize the closet you're in. It's that one right there. The lease for this apartment is almost up, so if I just leave this place, it'll collapse any possible future you're from, erasing you from existence. No, wait! Bye. Believe it or not, this was my attempt at a short video. I had to cut out so much to keep this on topic, so if you want to hear more, make sure you check out the director's commentary on Twitch, linked below. In the meantime, I'd like to give a shout out to my newest Golden Fork patrons, Isaiah and Hantian. If you'd like to join this Readiness pod, head on over to patreon.com/knowingbetter, or for a one-time donation, paypal.me/knowingbetter. Don't forget to integrate that subscribe button or the join button if you're a senior proctor. Check out the merch at knowingbetter.tv, follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and join us on the subreddit.